Hello, hello, and welcome to the last 2 hours between you and many beers, or a flight home, or something. I am, in fact, Colin Walker. I work at F5 Networks. My role is supposedly a senior product management engineer, as Rob said, but that doesn't really mean a whole hell of a lot to most folks. So let me explain who I am and what I do just a little bit before we get going for context. My background is actually in software, believe it or not. That was a while ago now, but I used to write a fair amount of code back in the day before getting into doing this product managey kind of stuff. So I do actually understand some of what you're talking about out there in the big bad world of coding. I used to write some C and Perl and PHP and all that kind of junk many moons ago. Now I mostly write things in Tickle and some JavaScript and whatnot because of F5, but that's a different conversation we'll get to in a little bit. I ended up at a networking company somehow. And fortunately, they do some really cool coding things, which is why I'm here to talk to all of you. So I've been at F5 for about 10 years or so, and we've done a lot of stuff with programming in that time frame, and I'm here to talk about some of the newer things that we're doing that might actually apply to your world that hopefully is compelling and whatnot. So I'm here to talk about programmability in kind of a broader sense. And it's an interesting thing. I talk about F5 quite a lot. I talk all over the world. Sydney, actually, is one of the places that I've been, and it's a great time. Most of the time, I am talking to very networking-focused people, trying to convince them why this programming thing is really, really cool. Something tells me that's not this audience. I think most of you probably are pretty programming aware, yes? So it's going to be an interesting thing. I'm glad to have you out there that speak my language a little bit more, and hopefully we can have a conversation about that. So hopefully you'll forgive me talking a little bit about this programming thing in some very high-level, broad terms for a bit, and then I'll get into some of the specific things that F5 does as well. So first of all, two things I always say when I present. One is I would far rather talk with you than at you. So if you have any kind of questions or comments or want to throw things at the stage randomly or whatever it is you want to do, please do so. Although I can't dodge very well because the lights are really bad. But please do so. Don't feel like you have to sit and wait till the end. And the other thing is I'm going to try and be a little bit interactive here. So don't bother, or don't hesitate to raise your hands or yell out or that kind of stuff. First of all, I'm curious, because this is a very different audience than we've talked to a lot of times, who here uses F5 devices in some fashion in their current I love you all? Can we hug? I should hug. All of you you're all my friends. Every single, you in the front can't see. Every single person in the room raised their hands. So that means we're in good company. Okay. That's a fantastic thing. I do too, by the way. I use F5 devices, which shouldn't shock any of you. So I'm here to talk about programmability. So what is programming? In a very high level, the way I try and describe it is programming is this thing that allows you to do stuff you're not supposed to be able to do. And by not supposed to, I don't mean that somebody's trying to stop you. I mean that whatever tool or device or software or application or whatever the hell it is that you're doing, it's not allowing you to do the things that you need to do and want to do. So you're looking for a way around that. Whether it's to build your own solution for something, whether it's to modify a solution that currently exists, whether it's to take a solution that currently exists, kick it in the head, and make it do things the way that you think it should, you're writing code to get around some kind of a problem, right? This isn't the kind of thing that you're writing code just because you feel like it, although we do that too sometimes because we're geeks, let's be honest. Most of the time in business, you're doing this because you're trying to solve a problem. It is often the thing that holds stuff together. So you might have 10 disparate applications and technologies that are all doing different things, whether it's on the networking level or at the app level or all this stuff. And the way you actually hold those together and tie them into one cohesive unit is with all kinds of different code. You're writing these scripts or these large-scale pieces of application code that actually allow these things to integrate and act as one functional unit rather than a whole bunch of tiny bits off doing their own thing. It's a very, very important piece of the application delivery story. And it's an interesting thing because when I talk to the networking side of the house, oftentimes, they say, yeah, but why do we care about any of that stuff? I've already mentioned that I was a programmer before this, not a networking guy. I couldn't trunk my way out of a wet paper bag. But I am absolutely happy to say that the reason that we are doing the programming thing is because the applications are the part that matters, right? I don't really care whether you're talking about networking stuff or app stuff, or the application is the reason we're all here. We're trying to deliver something to a user in an effective, efficient way, and doing that is all we should really care about, right? I don't care if you're offloading your technology to the network level or not. If it makes sense to do so, great. If it doesn't, don't. We're here to hopefully talk about things that might have some value for you to do that, but the application is what matters. So that's why me, that works for a quote-unquote networking company, is standing here talking to you about coding, right? To that end, to understand what the applications are doing, and to not just understand, but influence them, to be actually fluent, not just aware, we have to do the programmability thing. We have to speak in languages that the applications do, right? If we are just passing traffic and we don't actually understand what is being passed, there is precisely zero chance that we are going to be able to effectively pass, route, whatever that, let alone modify it, enhance it, etc., which is kind of our shtick. For all of you folks that raised your hands about using F5, I think you know by now that the thing we pride ourselves on is making applications flow better, right? Secure, fast, available is the tagline, has been for years. If we don't know what the applications are trying to do, we're generally going to be very bad at doing that. So we have to understand what they're doing. And the applications, as all of you are aware, are getting increasingly complex and difficult to understand. And there's more moving parts, and things are now in multi-tiered data centers, and all of this noise. And the applications are the ones that are driving all of that, and the user's needs and that kind of thing. So we have to keep up. So here we are talking at PuppetConf, not at some networking event, which makes me very happy, but hopefully you all are happy about that too. So that's what programming is kind of in general. My job at F5 is to talk about programming at F5. So a little bit of history on me. Anybody, so you all raised your hands that you were F5 users, which is wonderful and makes me happy inside. Who here has used Dev Central? Anybody? Anybody? Not nearly as many. This is the part where I pause and cry briefly. Dev Central is F5's user community, kind of like SDN for Microsoft, that kind of thing. I was one of the folks that helped found that, and we've built a lot of content around that, all that kind of stuff. If you've seen the name Colin out there, I'm that guy. I am responsible at this point for all of the programming stuff at F5. F5, in case you aren't aware, does lots of things with programming. We do data plane programming, we do control plane programming, we have an open API in both SOAP, XML, and REST. These are the different tools that we offer right now. There's iRules, which is our data plane stuff. It's a tickle-based scripting language that you can actually write code to intercept, modify, route, reroute, deny, etc. traffic on the wire at wire speed. There's iControl, which is both SOAP and REST, like I just mentioned, which is what allows you to manage the device itself. So it's our control plane API. There's iApps, which are a way for you to basically package applications and config sets so that you can deploy and redeploy those pretty easily and rapidly. There's iCall, there's iSense, there's TMSH. You don't need to learn all of these things today. The point of this is we're doing a lot of things with programming, and we're very much taking this seriously as we want to help you deliver the application and be an application platform, which is why we're here. Okay, so to that end, one of the things that we focus on is automation and deployment. So there's this really, really cool company that did this survey and talked to a bunch of users. And this is a quote from that survey. You probably heard of the company. High-performing organizations deploy code 30 times more often and 8,000 times faster than their peers, deploying multiple times a day versus an average once a month. They also have double the change success rate and restore service 12 times faster than their peers. The net results are lower business risk and more operational agility, says Puppet Labs, who you've probably heard of. Basically what this boils down to is the ability to automate and rapidly deploy, redeploy, modify configuration of anything that drives the application, which, let's be clear, includes the network, is vital. It's really, really important. It allows you to be more successful. It allows you to be more flexible and agile. It allows you to save money, which is a great thing. Everybody here, I guarantee someone in your organizational chain, if you say you can save them money, gets really, really excited and has good dreams that night. Programmability is one of the things that allows us to do that, and Puppet is one of the tools that allows that to happen, which is why we're all here talking about this stuff. Okay, so back in the day, many, many moons ago, when I used to actually write code, there was a pretty straightforward application deployment cycle that happened somewhat like this, right? You go through and you build out the application code, you want to deploy it, it goes through to a request somewhere into IT, they sit on it for a little while because it takes a long time to get deployed. Eventually those services get built out, they deploy your code and you hope it works. And then you go into the test cycle from there into the real world, assuming you've done the test in the back end and all that kind of stuff. That's fine, but does anybody's application deployment cycle look like this anymore? Yours does? I'm terrified. I'm sorry to hear that. Do you like that it does? No. Do you? No. What would you rather have it look like? Right, so the answer was he would rather have it so that they can hit a button on their own when they need something and have things spin up. It looks a lot like this slide that he was not at all prompted to answer. I'll pay your bribe later. Really, today, we aren't doing things in the order of weeks and months, right? Does anybody here have a customer that you honestly think you could tell them, yes, I'll get your service online in 6 weeks, and they would be happy with that? I don't. I don't have those customers. If you do, we should talk because they seem easier than my customers. But I don't have those customers. My customers want things in minutes, hours if I'm lucky, but usually minutes. They want to very much, yes, as the gentleman in the front said, push a button, have the service spin up, and have it work. And not only that, they want these services to work not just in one place. It's not like they have a super controlled, simple environment. These things are working in AWS, they're working at Rackspace, they're working all over the place in different environments. Sometimes in their DMZ, yes, but oftentimes spread across multiple locations. That makes this pretty prickly, right? This is no longer a super simple thing to just spin up a service and have it work. This takes a lot of moving parts, and there's a fair amount of intelligence that has to be built into this. Hence that whole scripting thing makes this impossible stuff possible and allows you to take multiple disparate parts of things and tie them together. Okay, how do we do that? Everybody here knows REST. Everybody here has dealt with it. REST is an extremely, extremely powerful emerging, well, not even emerging, now it's here, but it has been emerging technology for a while. It allows us to communicate in a common way. It's a methodology that we all use, allows us to communicate with different APIs. You all know that. So here's the thing. Part of the reason I'm here talking to you is that iControl, our main API for modifying the configuration of our devices, has historically been built on a SOAP XML platform. Has been that way for 12 years, 11 years, somewhere in there. Quite a long time. Very, very effective, very, very granular. It works extremely well, and we're not getting rid of it. But we have realized that if we want to talk to people like you, folks that are doing rapid deployments, application-aware and driven use cases and that sort of thing, that we aren't going to be able to do things and force you to do them our way. We want to allow you to do things your way, which it turns out, this fun chart over here that shows the Superman slide, REST is the way that's going. There's a logarithmic curve for the APIs that are getting deployed in a RESTful way versus pretty much anything else. That chart you can't quite read, but for reference, the top line says REST, and the other 4 lines says nobody cares, because it doesn't really matter. So F5's on this bandwagon. We have built a RESTful API. We allow everybody to use that. It's baked into the box. It's publicly accessible, blah, blah, blah. And you can do anything that you could do on the device via that API, which means now you have a really, really simple, really efficient way to access the device to make any modifications you need. Which means if you want to deploy things, if you want to automate stuff, make changes, check to see the status of things, polling, logging, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, you can do all of that remotely. You can do all of that remotely via REST, which means you can do all of that remotely in a way that I hope you're already doing a lot of things, which we're hoping means it's really, really easy to tie in F5 into things like your Puppet deployments and that sort of thing. Okay, so briefly I'll show you what this iControl REST thing looks like, okay? So who here has used TMSH? We're gonna continue the hand-raising exercises because it's calisthenics before your drinks. TMSH is our traffic management shell. It's our custom shell that we built on the devices to allow you to do CLI management, right? Pretty straightforward stuff. If I take a look at this command that would be used to modify that pool in TMSH, it's pretty straightforward. You can probably all see that. It's straightforward. But modify LTM pool member, the IP address, go. The iControl REST command to do the same thing, if you look, is basically the exact same thing. They're reorganized a little bit, but it's the same thing. You're calling that command, the test1 pool members, there's the pool member. You're doing a put to send the sessions and change that state to user enabled. The message here is anybody that knows how to use our TMSH can already use our iControl REST stuff. That was one of the comments that we got a fair amount about the SOAP-based API was it was extremely extensive, 4,400 plus methods. You could do absolutely anything, comb your hair with the API. It was fantastic. The problem was you had to learn it. There's a learning curve. You have to figure out how to do the things because it's not the same as administering your F5 device. How nice would it be that if you could take whatever you're used to doing on the command line and just have that be the exact same way you administer things in your scripts? Who would like that? Yeah, everybody raise your hand. Right. Okay, so that's the thing we're doing. We have intentionally built this so that it is not some fancy newfangled way of doing things. You don't have to go back and relearn how all of this works. It's effectively, this is the part where I get to wave my product management hand and say effectively a shim on top of TMSH so that we have a web service that you connect into, authenticate through, all that kind of stuff. And then you're effectively, hand waving, issuing TMSH commands via the API, which is fantastic. That buys us lots of things. I'll talk about those in a minute. So here's a couple more examples. If we're creating virtuals, you can see both a Perl example and a Python example here, but this is pretty straightforward stuff. Anybody here done iControl SOAP work before? Some of the SOAP XML stuff, 2 people in the room. I don't want to knock it because it's a fantastic technology and it actually works really, really well, but it isn't super low drag. If you want to create a pool, it takes a fair amount of code to get there. It's really, really good for large batch processes. We have some really large customers doing stuff where they want to take down 16,000 servers and do something to all 16,000 of them, and it's amazing for that. But if you want to add a pool, which you might want to do when your Puppet, your Puppet Master goes out and it starts adding things, you can send a single command really, really easily with this stuff, and that's a very useful thing for this audience, I think, I hope, maybe, perhaps. Okay. So I actually very intentionally left a couple of slides in that are pretty funny in this audience. So what's this REST stuff? This is the kind of level that I'm going to with a lot of the folks that we're talking to because they've never heard of REST before. Who here's heard of REST before? Everyone still awake? Okay, good. And one of my favorite things ever in the history of the universe is the http://. Okay, so you all know what REST is. You all know what JSON is. We're not going to bother that. Here's what F5's REST stuff looks like. This is the part where it actually gets interesting as far as we're concerned. So you want to go through and look at your pool information, and here we go. You suddenly get JSON kicked out that looks very much like, I would imagine, a lot of the other APIs that you deal with. That's kind of a good thing, right? Standardization and expected deliverables and all that kind of stuff. So this is what you would get if you go query the pool information for this REST pool. Here's each member, the description if there were one, the member name, and you can both get and set pretty easily, modify, delete, all that kind of stuff like you would with any other API. Not groundbreaking in the programming industry, but it's a thing that most networking vendors don't and can't do. And we can, and we are, and hopefully it's a very useful thing. Okay, so let's get into the API itself a little bit. The best place to start if you're curious about this stuff is Dev Central. That was the part where I had you raise your hands and then I cried hot tears of sadness because you didn't know Dev Central. So Dev Central is our user community. It's a place where you can go learn about iRules, iControl, all of our technologies that deal with programmability. But iControl REST is on there. We have a wiki up there that has information about what it does, what version it came out in, and there's a code share. As you can see, these pretty little links underneath. These are all code snippets that show you something happening in iControl REST or in our BigIQ technology, which is a different conversation we'll get to later if we have time. This has been up for the past, I don't know, 8 months or so since I put it up there when we came out. 11.5 was our last release that this came out. So you can go up there now and start getting your hands into how this stuff works. You can see some working examples, and I have a couple examples here as well. So any questions so far? Am I losing anybody? Everyone still okay? All right, good. So let's take a look at how this looks. I can access this stuff really, really simply via the command line, right? Everyone knows curl, so you can grab this via curl and get an output. That's not extraordinarily useful, so we can also do it in a web browser, which isn't super useful either. So here's what it would look like if you actually had a browser plugin that's then parsing your JSON so you can get things out. There's lots of really simple ways to do this, as you all probably know, because you deal with REST all the time, I imagine. I don't really know, because I can't see half of you. But because we are using a standard protocol for all of these sorts of things, it becomes very, very easy to get access to them. So here's an example of listing some information off of our device, right? So we're going to go through, we're going to fire off the command that just goes to the internal. So that's the name of a self IP address. So all I have to do is call out to the actual name of the object itself, if you know the name of the object, and if you don't, we can do lists and all that kind of stuff. And we're going to kick back all of the data about that object. So here you can see it tells you what kind of object it is, its name, the last update, the self link, what partition it's on, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. All the data that you might need if you were going to try and automate some of this stuff, right? That might not be readable. So here's a couple of screenshots of me actually going through and doing some updates on this stuff. This one goes through and rather than using sed, it's using JQ, but it's going through and listing out, again, some self IP stuff. And then this is a modification. So here's a post actually being done. So we're actually modifying this stuff in line. So we send the one curl command, it goes up to the dev box. We're sending along with it the name of the IP we want to add, the address, the VLAN, the information that's needed for the actual object on the device. It returns, and then I'm doing a lookup after that to list the actual self IP address again. And then you can see that it's got the data that I just sent up there is now an object on the device. So where before it would have taken me 30 or 40 lines of code to do this kind of thing. Now it's a single shell command. I can fire off a curl request, slam an IP on the box, and it's there and functional a second later, a fraction of a second later, as soon as my command returns. Is that kind of thing useful? Is that an interesting thing? Is it the end of the day and everyone's staring at me blankly? I can't quite tell. I think it's interesting. I think it's super useful stuff. This is the kind of thing that I think allows for really, really rapid automation and integration with all sorts of things that currently exist. We'll talk about that in a minute as well. So why Puppet and F5? Why do you care? Why does this matter? I think it's an interesting thing. So there's a lot to be gained on this. Security is one of them, right? The fact that you're actually tying into a device that has the security built in. We are in front of a lot of application deployments. We have a very rigid security policy as far as authorization and authentication and of what you have access to. So if you are helping deploy through the F5 device, you're making use of all of that, which is actually a pretty powerful thing. Cost is absolutely an issue. So if you can flexibly and dynamically modify the way that your applications are working, and you can provision things as needed and deprovision them as needed, you can actually save a fair amount of money, right? It's a very cost-effective thing to have on-demand provisioning and on-demand resources. We actually have some interesting use cases I can get into, but we have a lot of users that they have really, really nasty peak usage spikes, but they are pretty low usage for large periods of the time. You think of retail stores or some of the online sports entities and that kind of stuff. Well, what they really want is they want to be able to, as I'm sure you've heard, they want to be able to have a very, very small footprint most of the time, but then as the demand goes up, they want to automatically ramp those things up, whether it's in the cloud or on private VM clusters, that kind of thing. That's great. That can certainly happen without a networking device that allows you to build up the piping and infrastructure as needed to do that. It becomes a pretty clunky endeavor. You have to have things pre-configured, and then your application has to fire things off in a very certain way in a very rigid manner. And it's a lot easier if your application can just sense that it needs things to get built. You can go fire off a config deployment via Puppet that then ties into F5 and says, hey, I need some networking resources. Give me an IP address. And by the way, jam this rate limiting profile on it and add some firewalls and all that kind of stuff, and we can just do it. It's really, really straightforward. It happens very, very easily these days. You can also take advantage of virtualization, like I was just talking about with the VMware example, in a lot of interesting ways. Before, some people have been a little bit gun-shy about virtualizing things, and certainly about putting things off network and in the cloud and all that kind of stuff, because they want to have more control of things. And networking, in a lot of ways, has been one of those things that's hard for them to control, especially to control in any kind of graceful sort of way. This helps alleviate that, right? I mean, we're seeing this, the SDN trend, and this isn't just us. This is the way the industry is moving, right? We are trying to watch and listen to what everybody needs out there and act as rapidly as possible. But this isn't like we're the only folks out there doing this. If you are able to take advantage of virtualization and that kind of stuff, you're able to do a lot more flexibly, which is really what the end users want, as we talked about a little bit earlier. Avoid misconfiguration. I don't know about you, but when I use the CLI every once in a while, one of those commands doesn't get entered correctly. There was a really interesting study, something to the effect of like 9 or 10% of commands that get entered into the command line are errors. It's absolutely insane how often that happens. And test as much as you want, the human error condition is always a problem if you're doing these things and change control windows and whatnot. Who's been up at 2 a.m. and had to fix something more than once because they broke it twice? Yeah, I've been there. It's not fun. You thought you had the deployment ready to go and you try and install it, and then something doesn't go right because the IP address was 168, not 169, and you can't figure it out for half an hour, and yeah, it's not fun. Being able to automate these things programmatically is efficient. It's very rapid, it's very effective, but it's also very repeatable. You know what you're going to get. Scripts don't make mistakes very often, right? There are errors at times, but they are going to do the thing that you asked them to do. So you won't run into that, and it's actually a pretty sizable cost savings. Not only that, but if you're removing the human element, how would you like to not have to only not fix things at 2 a.m., but not be awake at 2 a.m.? If all of these things can just be automated, you're removing a huge amount of cost just in the human interaction, having to deploy the networking side of things, having to go through and deal with the application deployment and update, because it can all just be automated away. Provisioning time, we already talked about, goes down dramatically. A replication of efforts. So this is an interesting thing. We've seen a lot where, let's see. You guys heard of the DevOps thing? Does that term mean anything to folks? Yeah. Okay. So it's been an interesting thing to watch. Back when I was doing software for real, like actually trying to write code and deploy it to servers and stuff for web hosting companies, I was very much one of those people that didn't like the IT side of things. I was annoyed that they wanted to test my stuff, and I couldn't believe that I couldn't just take my code and put it into production, and how dare they make me go through change control and all that stuff, which is horrible and awful, but it's how it was. I mean, I was young and foolish and whatever. But it really is a thing. We do see this process where there have been these really, really strict separations of church and state when it comes to the IT operations side of things versus the application side of things. And these days, that's all going away. So you would end up with doubling efforts a lot of times, because I would go through and write the code and do the testing and do the test deployments and all this kind of stuff, and then I would go try and hand it to the ops side of things, and they would insist on doing all of that over again, very often with me involved. So with this kind of stuff, if we can just set up a harness that does all of the testing and deployment automatically, then they're satisfied that things got done correctly. I don't have to do it twice. It's a very, very effective thing. We're taking a lot of time out of this for everybody, right? And strong part integration is a great reason to use this, and this is very much a lead-in to a quote that I saw. As of Tuesday, there was an announcement. Enterprise-supported modules. So F5 and Puppet are working together as partners to build a module, a Puppet module, that will allow you to integrate directly with our devices. So I've been talking to some of the folks as the PM person from F5, talking to some of the folks at Puppet about how we get them as a partner, building a module that integrates into our REST-based API, and it's a thing that they're currently working on. So I imagine that in the relatively near future, you'll be able to have a thing that you can just plug directly in and get access to modifying whatever you need to on your networking device, which I think and I hope is a useful thing. I've had lots of customers asking for it, so I can only imagine that somebody here might think it's useful too. So that's a great reason to talk about F5 and Puppet. There's actually only a couple more things I wanted to get through, and I'll try and leave a little bit of time for questions here as well. So if there's any of this stuff that's interesting, please get a hold of me, ask questions. I deal with all of the coding stuff at F5, so whether you have questions about iRules or iControl or any of that stuff, please don't hesitate, come talk to me. I'm totally happy to be approached. Get out and register on Dev Central. So Dev Central, I'll do my pitch for Dev Central for 2 minutes here because I can't help myself, but it was about 160,000 people that are dealing with F5 technologies. If you're doing anything with F5 that is even slightly out of the box, I really, really recommend going out there. F5, kind of our stance is that we absolutely want to keep up to parity with all of our competitors in the industry with the drop-down boxes and check boxes and all the things you can do through the CLI and the GUI and whatnot. But one of our really, really big differentiators is this programming thing. It's why I'm standing here. It's why we're talking about programming to a company that's ostensibly a networking company. We really, really believe that the way that the applications are going to continue moving forward and the way that we all win as technologists is that we do things the way the application needs. And so F5 is investing huge into doing exactly that. Dev Central is one of those things. We have a lot of people out there doing a lot of interesting things with all of our different APIs, iRules, iControl, iCall, TMSH, all that kind of stuff. And it's happening out on Dev Central. So if you are at all involved in the F5 world, or frankly the networking world that deals with this kind of stuff, it's worth a look. It's free. You have to sign up for email registration kind of thing, but it can be any account you want. We aren't tracking who's out there too deeply or anything. But go out there and 24 hours a day, doesn't matter what time of day or where you are, we have people posting questions and dealing with answers and getting some pretty interesting stuff out there. There's been a lot of stuff that's posted to Dev Central that's now become part of the product, which is a pretty cool story into itself that I can ramble on about over a beer sometime if you want. But it really is a useful tool for us to figure out the things that you need as well. So if you are out there interacting, there's a way better chance that we get to hear what it is that the customers might need, and that we can roll that into future versions of the product, which, again, I hope is helpful in some fashion or another. There's also a white paper out there on Dev Central that talks about programmable networks, kind of this concept as a whole, how we see it, how we try and play into it. It wasn't written by me, but one of my colleagues that's very, very bright, and it's worth a read for sure. And we also have training at our university. One of the links that didn't get on here that I should probably talk about is there's the wiki that I mentioned for iControl REST. There's actually a series of documents out there that I wrote that deals with iControl REST and getting started on that. Definitely go check that out as well if you're interested. It talks about everything from how do you get connected and do your initial, give me the list of things that are available, all the way through doing some simple adds and modifies and deletes and that kind of stuff. And it'll kind of hold your hand and walk through the first steps of getting used to that stuff. And then once you get that far, just download the dev guide from the PDF and you'll be off into the races. So that's my spiel. I really do feel, I say at the beginning, my background is software. It's very much near and dear. I really do feel that programmability is the way that we are going to continue to support applications and the way that we're going to be able to make these things useful, not just in the sense that it does one or two things, but that it is able to grow and evolve as the needs of the user evolve. I was just talking to somebody earlier here in the speaker ready room, and they were saying that their company's a startup, and that what they're doing is they're basically creating outsourced compute resources that are being clustered on mobile devices. Think SETI, but rather than your desktops, it's using mobile devices, and you currently not used compute resources on those devices. My head almost popped off. I mean, the idea that we're doing those sorts of things, this stuff is advancing really, really rapidly, and I'm starting to feel old talking about it. This kind of stuff is what's going to allow us to keep up with that kind of technology and those kinds of companies that are coming up. So I am absolutely passionate about it and happy to be here and talk about it. So with that, if there's any questions, I have about 5-6 minutes left. Hopefully we can discuss what people are doing, if somebody wants to talk about what they're doing with F5, or if you have questions you need answered, or curious about why the heck I'm still standing here talking, please let me know. Yeah, over here.
A microphone here for questions.
Oh, we have a microphone for questions.
Yeah.
It's
We're
very
recording
fancy.
this.
Very fancy. It's top shelf.
Does the REST API cover just LTM or all the modules, like GTM?
It's a really good question. So in case anybody couldn't hear, the question was, does the REST API cover just LTM, which is our core traffic management module product, or all of the modules? The answer is it covers all of the modules. So one of the things that's actually really important about iControl REST that we gained in the movement to REST and making it a shim over TMSH, because TMSH is our shell that we use to manage the entire device, we have commands to manage the entire device, right? And as new modules get added, as new versions come out of those modules, new features and commands and stuff, they will automatically be put into the CLI, which means they will automatically be part of the API that you can access, right? Historically, the process was very much 2 steps, which was we would add a feature to whatever module it was, and then if we want to add access to it via the API, the older SOAP API, we had to then have a different dev team go through and make calls that tied into the actual backend hooks that fired off those processes. And we were good about keeping them in parity, but there was always delay, and it never happened exactly the same. You would learn how to run the CLI command, but then have to go figure out what the actual method in the API looked like. So yes, it covers all modules, and it covers all the modules the same way the CLI does. So once you figure out how to do it the first time, that's the way it's going to be no matter where you're doing it. Good question. You have a question too?
You stole my question.
Oh.
But I have another one. So I've heard the new Puppet approved module mentioned several times, but I haven't heard what the capability of this is. What are we going to use it to do?
So that's a very good question, and the very blunt answer is we're not sure yet. So the Puppet approved module is a thing that we're just now talking about, and it's currently being built, right? So before, what was happening was myself and a couple of folks at F5 that really dig this programming thing were trying to hack out some Puppet hooks to make it integrate with Puppet, and that you could contact the F5 and do some things. That was somewhat useful, but not super robust because we're not Puppet experts and we didn't have a full-time, deployment to do, or a person to do that or whatever. Now we're working with Puppet directly, and they have gotten a hold of us and said, hey, we'd like to build a module that ties into your device. Puppet's actually gonna do the dev work, and they're using us, myself and one other guy at F5, as kind of consulting resources on the F5 side to say, hey, what's the best way to do this? How do we tie into those APIs, and et cetera. So I'm actually not the one building the module. Some of the guys at Puppet are, so I couldn't tell you the exact functionality of what it's going to have. My understanding is that it's going to be a pretty full-featured way to manage anything that the big IP can do. Right now, the API is capable of doing almost everything, not everything, but almost everything that you can do in the box. And my hope is that the Puppet module will allow you to have access to almost all of that. So.
I think basically,
No, interrupt, please.
So a lot of the functionality that you're going to have, the basic LTM functionality, so it's going to be LTM only right out of the gate, and then it is my understanding, I don't want to speak for Puppet because I'm with F5, but it's going to allow you to sort of create virtuals, create load balancing pools, add and remove nodes from load balancing pools, apply SSL profiles, define the load balancing algorithm. So a lot of the basic configuration for LTM that you would do out of the box can be done by a Puppet. So you'll be able to sort of, when you deploy a stack or an application stack, you'll be able to sort of create the VIP, you'll be able to add nodes to a load balancing pools, do all those basic functions. Over time, with each new release cycle, they're going to be making improvements and advancements to that.
Yeah, so that's a very, very good point. I certainly don't expect that the very first release will have every possible feature in F5's devices exposed. That's a whole lot of dev work. But yeah, so that's one of my counterparts at F5 that manages the relationship with Puppet. So if he says that we're going to have the core LTM functionality, then I would take that as gospel. It sounds like that's what we're going to have.
It sounds more tenant-facing than from what he was saying, the features that you create on a pool. I'm sorry? It sounds more tenant-facing than admin-facing?
He said it sounds more tenant-facing than admin-facing.
Possibly. It would be good to have we could have a conversation offline, and it would be great to actually, we're actively soliciting customer feedback.
Right.
Because it's a work in progress, so we'd like to sort of say, okay, if we talk to 10 different customers, and there literally are like hundreds of joint customers that are using either Puppet Enterprise or Puppet Open Source, we want to really make sure that we're building the features that customers will consume right out of the box,
Yep.
for lack of a better term. So I'd love to get your feedback and see what your must-haves are or what your like-to-haves are.
Right. Like I said, it's being developed now. So if you have feedback on a thing that you would like to see, that's definitely the time to get us the feedback. We're trying to find people to tell us exactly what they need out of things so that we can build it right the first time for sure.
Just one last question out the back here.
Okay.
So in the future, do you have plan to include in Puppet configuring the F5 device itself? Like provisioning a F5 device itself using Puppet. I know you can add pools.
Like a bare metal provision of the F5 device?
Yeah.
Well, so again, it's being built currently. That won't be available in the first version of things. Since I'm not the one writing the code, I can't tell you that that's going to happen. I can tell you that via iControl REST, you can do that. We currently have scripts that are doing exactly that via the iControl API. So it's a thing that we expose. It is absolutely a possible function. So I can see at some point we could do that via Puppet, but it won't be in the first version, I'm sure.
So I'll just add a couple of caveats to that. Yes, we'd like to get there. Obviously, we're stack ranking priorities, and the resources and Puppet and F5 are working cooperatively on that. You can do a lot of that with BigIQ, which is our management platform already. But we're sort of taking a both-and approach. So BigIQ is our management platform and can do a lot of that provisioning in a virtualized environment or cloud environment. And then, obviously with Puppet, that capability is a place where we'd like to get to.
There you go.
Great. We're going to have to wrap it up there. Thank you very much, Colin.
Okay, thanks very much, guys.